A small team, deep inside the United States, attempting what no foreign government has ever successfully done on American soil. The target is held in one of the most surveilled nations on Earth. If they succeed, they rewrite the rules of sovereignty. If they fail, they start a war no one asked for. But who would even attempt this, and how far would they actually get?
In early 2026, the United States launched a military operation inside Venezuela. Special Operations Forces entered sovereign Venezuelan territory, neutralized presidential security, and extracted President Nicolás Maduro along with his wife, Celia Flores. The operation was brief, surgical, and heavily publicized within hours of its completion. The justification cited by Washington was legal, not political. The U.S. Department of Justice had unsealed indictments against Maduro years earlier in 2020, charging him with narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and corruption. According to U.S. prosecutors, Maduro had turned Venezuela into a transit hub for Colombian cocaine moving into Central America, the Caribbean, and ultimately the United States. American officials framed the extraction as the apprehension of an indicted fugitive, not the removal of a sitting president. But from Caracas and from much of the global South, the interpretation was different. To Venezuela's remaining government loyalists and allied states, this was an illegal invasion, a violation of sovereignty dressed in legal language. International reactions were divided. Some nations condemned the action, others remained silent, a few quietly approved. And inside Venezuela, something began to stir. Not an army, not a declaration of war, something quieter. Because if the United States could reach into Venezuela and take its leader, could Venezuela ever do the reverse?
Diplomacy was the first consideration, but there was no treaty, no extradition arrangement, no legal mechanism Venezuela could invoke to demand Maduro's return. Washington had already made its position clear. Maduro was a criminal defendant, not a political prisoner. Any negotiation would require Venezuela to recognize the legitimacy of the U.S. charges, something Caracas categorically refused. Legal appeals through international courts were equally limited. The International Court of Justice could hear arguments on sovereignty, but enforcement was another matter entirely. The U.S. does not recognize the jurisdiction of several international bodies, and even favorable rulings would carry no practical weight. Military options were even less viable. Venezuela's armed forces, while capable regionally, had no capacity to project power into U.S. territory. A conventional assault would be suicidal. Missile strikes were not credible. Naval engagement was out of the question. And so, what remained was something far riskier. Not diplomacy, not war, something in between. A covert extraction mission conducted inside the United States without detection, without attribution, and without triggering the full weight of American retaliation. There was only one option left, and it was almost impossible. The United States operates one of the most comprehensive domestic surveillance architectures in the world. The National Security Agency monitors global communications. The FBI tracks foreign intelligence activity across all 50 states. The Department of Homeland Security coordinates border and transit monitoring. And since September 2001, interagency communication has only improved. Any foreign operation inside U.S. borders faces an environment saturated with detection mechanisms. Cell phone metadata, facial recognition, license plate readers, airport screening, and financial tracking all combine into a layered system that is difficult to evade for even short periods. Beyond surveillance, there is the issue of jurisdiction. Moving a detained individual across U.S. borders against their documented legal status triggers federal kidnapping statutes, regardless of the target's identity. Any team caught in the act would face immediate arrest and prosecution, not diplomatic expulsion. Discovery doesn't just end the mission, it exposes the entire chain of command. So the first constraint is clear. They can't look Venezuelan at all. If Venezuela were to seriously attempt this, the operatives could not be tied to the Venezuelan state in any traceable way. No known intelligence officers, no military personnel with documented service records, no individuals flagged in U.S. databases. The logical option would be deniable intermediaries,
third country nationals with clean identities, no travel history to Venezuela, and plausible reasons to be inside the United States. These could be deep cover assets cultivated over years, or contractors operating through cutouts with no formal ties to Caracas. Some analysts have speculated that sympathetic non-state actors, ideologically aligned with Maduro's Bolivarian movement, could be recruited. Others have suggested private intelligence operatives, the kind who exist in gray markets across Latin America and Eastern Europe, might be approached for precisely this kind of work. None of these options are Hollywood fantasies. They're the unglamorous realities of deniable operations. Small teams, clean legends, no extraction support. But even if the team is perfect, they still need one critical piece of information. They need to know where the target is and when he'll be vulnerable.
High-value detainees in U.S. federal custody are not held in predictable locations. Maduro would almost certainly be housed in a secure federal facility, possibly a metropolitan detention center or a designated high-security unit. His movements for court appearances, medical evaluations, or legal consultations would follow unpredictable schedules, often varied deliberately to prevent exactly this kind of planning. Secure transport protocols for such individuals involve armored vehicles, armed escorts, counter-surveillance measures, and route randomization. Even if a team knew the general facility, they would have no reliable way to anticipate transit windows without inside access. And inside access is where things get exponentially harder. Infiltrating U.S. Marshals, federal detention staff, or legal teams requires years of positioning or successful recruitment, both of which carry enormous risk of exposure. The location problem is not a single puzzle. It is a rolling series of unknowns, each dependent on the last. Even if they find the window, escaping the country is harder. Getting Maduro into a vehicle is one problem. Getting him out of the United States is another entirely. The moment the extraction is noticed, a countdown begins. Every border checkpoint goes on alert. Every airport is flagged. Every port of entry receives updated bulletins. And that assumes detection takes time. In reality, modern tracking would likely identify the breach within minutes, not hours. Federal marshals communicate in real time. Detention facilities have layered alarm systems. Transport teams report in at fixed intervals. An extraction team would have a vanishingly small window to reach international waters or airspace. Private aircraft would need to be pre-positioned, fueled, and crewed. Flight paths would need to avoid interdiction zones. And even then, U.S. air defense can scramble intercept aircraft faster than most people realize. The point of no return isn't the grab, it's the moment they try to leave. And the U.S. response will arrive faster than imagined. Within minutes of confirmed extraction, the FBI's Critical Incident Response Group would activate. Simultaneously, the U.S. Marshals would lock down surrounding jurisdictions. The Department of Homeland Security would issue border alerts, and depending on the assessed threat level, military assets could be repositioned. This is not speculation. These protocols have been rehearsed extensively since the early 2000s. If the team is still within U.S. borders after the first hour, they are likely to be tracked and contained. If they are in transit via aircraft, they would be intercepted before reaching international airspace. If they attempt a maritime exit, the Coast Guard and Navy would coordinate a response long before territorial waters are cleared. The U.S. does not need to catch the operatives in the act. It only needs to delay them long enough for the net to close. There are two possible outcomes, and neither of them is clean. In the first outcome, the mission fails. The team is intercepted, arrested, and publicly identified. Venezuela denies involvement, but evidence links the operation to state actors. International condemnation follows. Diplomatic ties with remaining partners weaken, and the United States gains a propaganda victory that justifies even harsher measures against Caracas. In the second outcome, the mission somehow succeeds. Maduro is extracted from U.S. custody and returned to Venezuelan soil. But then what? The United States does not forget. Retaliatory sanctions intensify. Covert operations inside Venezuela increase. Allied pressure from Colombia, Brazil, and Caribbean states escalates. And the precedent set by the mission invites future instability across the hemisphere. Even success does not restore stability.
It accelerates a different kind of crisis. Paradoxically, success could be worse.
A successful extraction would not just be an intelligence embarrassment for the United States, it would trigger a legal and diplomatic unraveling felt far beyond Caracas. First, it would set a precedent. If Venezuela can extract a detained leader from U.S. soil, what stops other nations from attempting similar operations? What stops the U.S. from retaliating in kind, more aggressively against other adversarial states? Second, it would collapse any remaining diplomatic infrastructure between the two nations. Embassies, back channels, and intermediary negotiations would all cease. The space for future resolution would shrink dramatically. Third, it would damage Venezuela's relationships with neutral or sympathetic states. Countries that quietly tolerated Maduro would distance themselves to avoid association with an act widely condemned under international law. And finally, it would not resolve the original problem. Maduro would return to a Venezuela still fractured, still sanctioned, and now more isolated than before. The reversal of an extraction does not undo the extraction, it compounds it.
What begins as a question of capability ends as a question of consequence. Could Venezuela, in theory, assemble the resources for such an operation? Perhaps. Stranger things have been attempted in the history of intelligence work. But the operation itself is only the beginning. Every step forward opens 2 steps of risk. Every success creates a new vulnerability. And every outcome, whether failure or extraction, leads to a future more unstable than the present. A covert mission of this nature is not a simple reversal of what the United States did. It is a gamble with ramifications that extend far beyond the moment of extraction, reshaping alliances, legal norms, and regional power for years to come. And so the real question is not whether Venezuela could do it. The question is whether anyone would truly want to live with what comes after.
Someone told me I wouldn't hit 1,000 subscribers before March 2026. I'd really like you to help me prove them wrong. If this breakdown gave you something to think about, consider subscribing. It takes 2 seconds and it makes a real difference. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.